Have you ever looked at an old man and wondered what stories lie beneath the wrinkles on his face? What battles he fought, what memories haunt him, and what sacrifices he made silently, without asking for thanks? That old man was Henry. Henry wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a veteran, a man who had lived a lifetime in the shadows of war, carrying a weight no younger man could imagine. His hands, weathered and steady, held the traces of countless missions, late nights, and lost friends. The kind of hands that had saved lives and carried the fallen back home. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when Henry decided to walk into Eagle Arms, the local gun shop tucked away on the corner of Main Street. The shop was filled with the scent of gun oil and leather, a place that once might have felt like home to him. Today he needed something simple, a new holster for his old M1911 pistol, the same one he had carried during his Navy SEAL days decades ago. As he stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled softly, but the welcome was anything but warm. The clerk behind the counter barely glanced up. He was a young man, maybe early 20s, with earbuds still in his ears and his eyes glued to his phone screen. Henry cleared his throat, a polite, old-fashioned gesture that went unnoticed. "Excuse me, son. Could you help me find a holster for a Colt M1911? The clerk finally looked up, not with kindness but with impatience. His lips curled into a smirk that was part disbelief and part annoyance. "Sir, we don't carry that model anymore. That's ancient," he said with a shrug. Henry blinked, trying to hide the sting of those words. "It's not just any pistol, it's the one I carried in service. It's more than a gun to me." The clerk rolled his eyes. "Look, we sell the latest gear here. Maybe you should try a museum if you want that old junk." The words hit Henry like a slap. He felt the room grow, colder. Nearby customers turned to watch, some whispering, others chuckling. "I'm just trying to buy a holster," Henry said quietly, his voice trembling but controlled. "I'm not here to cause trouble." The clerk leaned forward, voice rising with arrogance. "Then maybe you should leave. We don't serve your kind here." Henry's heart sank. "Excuse me?" The clerk laughed, cruel and loud. "Yeah, old man, this isn't your place anymore." The laughter around him grew. Henry's grip tightened, on his cane, the wood creaking under pressure. At that moment, the shop owner came out of the back room. "What's going on here?" he asked, eyes flicking between Henry and the clerk. The clerk shrugged dismissively. "Old guy was asking for outdated stuff, told him to get lost." The owner sneered at Henry, his eyes cold and dismissive. "You don't belong here, Grandpa." Henry's mouth went dry. He felt the weight of every year, every scar, every memory, pressed down by those two words. "You don't belong." He turned slowly and made his way toward the door. Each step was heavier than the last, the sound of his cane tapping a painful rhythm on the floor. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed. 5 people walked on without a glance. Some stared with pity. Others averted their eyes. Henry sat down on a nearby bench, breathing hard. The sting was not just from the words but from the silence that followed. The silence of a country forgetting its own heroes. His thoughts drifted to the war, to the nights under a cold moon, the distant gunfire, the faces of brothers he would never see again. He remembered Joseph, his closest friend, the tattoo they had both gotten during their training, the Navy SEAL trident, a symbol of honor and sacrifice. His forearm itched as he looked down. The faded tattoo was a reminder of a past many had forgotten. As Henry sat there, lost in memories and pain, a young man watched from across the street. He was quiet, but determined. He reached for his phone and dialed a number. "Hey, you need to hear this," he whispered. "An old vet just got kicked out of Eagle Arms." That one call set something in motion. The moment the young man ended the call, a ripple of urgency spread through the quiet town. On the other end of the line, a voice answered calmly but with steel beneath the calmness. "I'm on my way." That voice belonged to Jake, a seasoned Navy SEAL who had trained alongside Henry decades ago. They had faced death together, relied on each other's grit and trust in the darkest hours. Over the years, Jake had watched Henry grow from a fierce warrior into a quiet, humble man. But now, he felt a fire reignite inside him. A fire that would not be ignored. Within minutes, messages buzzed through secure channels, and the SEAL team began mobilizing. The guys who owed their lives to Henry weren't going to let this slide. Meanwhile, Henry sat on the bench outside Eagle Arms, his breath shaky but his mind clear. The weight of rejection still pressed on his chest, but he forced himself to remember what truly mattered: his honor, his service, and the brothers who had his back. As he looked up, a stranger approached cautiously. "Sir, I'm sorry you were treated that way. Not everyone here understands what you mean to us." Henry's eyes met the young man's. There was genuine respect in that simple apology. "I'm used to it," Henry replied softly. "This country sometimes forgets those who protected it." The young man shook his head. "Not everyone. I'm calling some friends, they know you." Henry managed a weak smile. "That means more than you know." Back at a nearby training compound, the SEALs were suiting up, checking weapons and reviewing plans. The camaraderie was palpable, a brotherhood forged by years of hardship and loyalty. Jake stood at the front, voice steady but fierce. "Henry's always been our backbone. Now it's our turn to have his back." One by one, the SEALs climbed into their trucks, engines roaring to life. They weren't just going to confront the shop owner, they were going to remind a town what respect looks like. As the convoy rolled through the streets, people stopped and stared. Rumors began to spread. "The SEAL team is back in town. They're coming for the old vet." Henry, unaware of the storm approaching, sat quietly on the bench. He didn't ask for help. He never had. But help was coming. A few blocks away, the gun shop owner sat behind his desk, oblivious to the gathering force headed his way. His phone buzzed. An anonymous tip. "You might want to prepare. They're coming." He scoffed. What could a few old soldiers do? But the answer was clear, more than he could handle. As dusk settled, Henry stood slowly, cane in hand. The sun dipped below the horizon, but a new light was rising, one fueled by loyalty, respect, and a refusal to let injustice stand. He looked at his tattoo again, faded but alive, a symbol of everything he had fought for and everything he still believed in. The SEALs arrived quietly at first, parking just out of sight. Their presence was a silent promise. They stood with Henry. No words were exchanged, no threats made, only the unbreakable bond of brotherhood. The battle for respect was about to begin. The sun had almost disappeared, and the streetlights flickered on one by one as the SEAL team gathered outside Eagle Arms. Their faces were calm but fierce, their eyes sharp with purpose. These weren't just any men. They were brothers bonded by blood, sweat, and years of shared hardship. They weren't here to start a fight. They were here to set things right. Henry stood a few steps away, his cane tapping softly against the cracked sidewalk. He felt a mixture of anxiety and pride. These men had seen him at his best and his worst. They knew the scars he carried, not all of them visible. Jake approached quietly and rested a hand on Henry's shoulder. "We're here, old man. You don't have to face this alone." Henry nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He looked up at the gun shop's grimy windows. Inside, the owner was probably watching, unaware of the storm gathering at his doorstep. The SEALs moved as one. Jake led the way, stepping into the store with quiet confidence. The chatter inside fell silent. The clerk who had thrown Henry out looked up, eyes wide with sudden fear. "Hey, what?" he began, but stopped as the front door swung open behind him. More SEALs entered, filling the shop with a presence impossible to ignore. Jake's voice was calm but commanding. "We're here for Henry. He's our brother." The shop owner emerged from the back, his face hardening. "You can't just barge in here." "We don't need to," Jake said evenly. "You already showed us what kind of place this is. Disrespecting a man who served this country is not something we'll stand for." Henry stepped forward, cane in hand, his voice steady, despite the anger burning inside. "I never asked for this, but I won't be treated like a stranger." The owner sneered. "This is my shop and I can refuse service to anyone." "That's your right," Jake said. "But you forgot one thing. Respect isn't a privilege. It's earned." Suddenly the air thickened with tension. The customers who had laughed earlier now watched in silence, sensing that something bigger than a simple argument was unfolding. One of the seals reached into his jacket and revealed a photo album, worn and faded. He flipped it open to a page showing young men in uniform, Henry among them, leading, laughing, standing tall. "These men," Jake said, voice rising, "gave everything to protect this country and the freedoms you enjoy." The clerk's face went pale. "You don't know Henry's story," the seal continued. "You don't know what it means to carry the weight he carries every day." The owner's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Henry took a deep breath, feeling the support of the men behind him. "I served with honor. I fought for this country, and I demand the respect every veteran deserves." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the clerk muttered, "I'm sorry." The owner nodded stiffly. "Maybe I was wrong." Henry looked around, eyes softening. It's never too late to do the right thing. Outside, the team stood guard, ready to defend their brother, not with weapons, but with unwavering loyalty. As Henry left the shop with a new holster in hand, the town had witnessed more than a confrontation. They had seen a lesson in respect, honor, and brotherhood. The old veteran wasn't just a relic of the past. He was a living testament to courage, a reminder that every generation owes a debt to those who serve, and tonight, that debt was paid. The night air was heavy with silence as Henry and the SEAL team exited the gun shop. The tension inside had faded, replaced by something quieter but no less powerful. Respect earned and restored. But for Henry, the battle wasn't over. He leaned on his cane, taking slow, deliberate steps down the cracked sidewalk. The city around him hummed softly. Distant car horns, the murmur of late-night conversations, the occasional bark of a stray dog. Everything felt different now. Lighter, somehow. Jake walked beside him. "You did good today." Henry shook, his head, a faint smile crossing his weathered face. "I didn't do this alone." "That's what brothers do," Jake said. "We look out for each other." They moved toward a nearby park bench where the others gathered. The SEALs, though tough and battle-hardened, were unusually quiet, sharing looks that spoke volumes. They had seen too much to celebrate easily, but tonight was different. Tonight was victory, not just for Henry, but for the ideals they fought to protect. Henry's mind drifted back to his early days as a SEAL recruit. The grueling training, the pain, the endless hours pushing beyond limits. But the hardest part, he remembered, wasn't the physical struggle. It was staying true to the values that made them who they were. Loyalty, honor, respect. The tattoo on his forearm itched again, a reminder of those promises etched into his skin and soul. It wasn't just ink, it was a legacy. One of the younger SEALs, David, sat beside him. "Sir, how do you keep going after everything?" Henry looked at him, eyes soft but fierce. "You don't give up. You carry the weight. Because someone has to. Because it's not about you. It's about the people who need you to be strong." David nodded slowly. "I hope I'm half the man you are someday." Henry chuckled. "You already are." As the night deepened, stories began to flow. Memories of battles, close calls, and quiet moments of brotherhood. Laughter mixed with silence, the kind only men who've shared war can understand. But beneath the camaraderie was a shared sadness, a knowledge that many veterans weren't as lucky as Henry, that many faced rejection, loneliness, and pain without support. Jake broke the silence. "We need to do more, not just for Henry, but for every veteran who's been forgotten." The group nodded in agreement. Henry stood, steady but resolute. "Then let's start right here, right now. We'll make sure no one is left behind, no one is disrespected. The SEAL team formed a circle, hands joined in a silent pledge. The old man at the center smiled, knowing this was more than a moment. It was a movement. A quiet man no longer, a warrior with a mission. As dawn approached, Henry looked up at the sky, soft hues of pink and orange breaking the darkness. He whispered, "For every brother and sister who fought and still fight, this is for you." And with that, the old veteran walked forward, not alone but carried by the strength of a brotherhood that would never let him fall. The days following that night were unlike any Henry had seen in years. Word of what happened at Eagle Arms spread through the town like wildfire. People who once ignored the quiet old man at the shooting range now nodded respectfully when they saw him. Some even came forward with apologies, stories, and thanks. But Henry knew the real work was just beginning. The SEAL team stayed close, not just out of loyalty, but because they saw the cracks beneath the surface, the loneliness many veterans silently battled every day. Jake called a meeting at the old community center, a dusty building that had seen better days but still held the promise of new beginnings. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with quiet determination. Veterans from all over the county arrived, some with shaky hands, others with proud, steady eyes. They came seeking support, understanding, and a place where they could be seen, not as forgotten relics but as brothers and sisters who had sacrificed everything. Henry stood before them, the room falling silent. "I know what it feels like to be overlooked, to be dismissed because the world moves too fast or forgets the past," he began, voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "But here in this room we remember, we honor each other, and we fight for the respect every veteran deserves." A young woman raised her hand. "Sir, how do you keep going when it feels like no one cares?" Henry looked at her, his eyes kind but fierce. "Because someone has to. Because the future depends on what we do today. We owe it to those who can't speak for themselves." The meeting became a plan, a mission to create a network of support, advocacy, and education for veterans and their families. It wasn't just about respect at the gun shop anymore. It was about changing hearts and minds across the country. Jake stepped forward. "We're starting a foundation. We'll work with local businesses, schools, and government. We'll tell our stories, so no one forgets." The room erupted in applause. For the first time in years, Henry felt a spark of hope. A new chapter beginning not just for him, but for every veteran who had felt invisible. Days turned into weeks. The foundation grew. Volunteers came forward. The town rallied behind the cause, but not everyone was happy. The owner of Eagle Arms, facing backlash and losing business, tried to discredit Henry and the SEAL team. Rumors and lies spread, but the foundation stood firm, fueled by truth and support. One evening, Henry received a letter, an invitation to speak at the town hall. He accepted, knowing this was his chance to turn pain into purpose. Standing before a packed crowd, Henry shared his story, the battles, the losses, the rejection, and the redemption. He spoke not just as an old veteran, but as a voice for thousands who had been silenced. When he finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause, tears, and standing ovations. Henry looked out at the faces, young and old, strangers and friends, and knew this was more than a victory. It was a movement that would never die. The momentum built by Henry and the SEAL team was unstoppable. The foundation grew from a small community center to a beacon of hope for veterans across the region. Every week, new faces joined the meetings, men and women who had served, who had felt forgotten, who now found a place to heal and be heard. Henry watched it all with quiet pride. What started as a painful rejection at a gun shop had sparked something much bigger, a movement to remind the world that respect for those who served was not optional. It was essential. One crisp autumn morning, Henry received a call from a local news station. They wanted to feature the foundation and Henry's story. He agreed, not for himself, but for every veteran whose sacrifices had gone unnoticed. The interview aired that evening, capturing hearts across the nation. Viewers were moved by Henry's honesty, his humility, and the deep love he held for his brothers and sisters in arms. Letters and donations poured in. Veterans from distant states reached out, sharing their own stories, asking for guidance, seeking connection. But amid the praise, Henry remained humble. "This isn't about me," he said during the interview. "It's about every man and woman who fought for a better tomorrow, and the respect they deserve when they come home." Back in town, the gun shop owner finally reached out. A letter arrived, sincere and filled with regret. "I was wrong," it read. "Thank you for showing me what respect truly means." Henry considered the letter long and hard. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was necessary. He replied simply, "Thank you for your courage to admit it. Respect is earned every day, for all of us." The foundation continued to thrive, building partnerships with schools to educate youth about service and sacrifice, working with local businesses to create veteran-friendly hiring policies, and organizing community events that celebrated veterans' contributions. One afternoon during a foundation gathering, a young recruit approached Henry. The recruit had a fresh tattoo, the same emblem Henry wore decades ago. "I want to thank you, sir," the young man said, voice steady but emotional. "You showed me what it means to be a true warrior, not just with a gun, but with heart." Henry smiled, feeling a deep connection to the future, a legacy carried on by those who understood that courage wasn't just on the battlefield. It was in everyday kindness, respect, and standing up for what's right. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of gold and purple, Henry sat quietly on a bench, cane resting beside him. He thought of the journey, from the shooting range to the courtroom of public opinion, from rejection to redemption, and he knew this truth. Respect is not given lightly. It is earned through sacrifice, lived through integrity, and preserved through forgiveness. The old man who once sat quietly at the shooting range was now a symbol of hope, a reminder that no one is ever truly alone when brothers and sisters stand by your side, and that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest message. Moral of the story: true respect is earned by living with honor, showing compassion, and standing united with those who serve. It's a legacy we all share, to protect, to remember, and to uplift those who gave everything for our freedom.